How are you doing? My name is Vincent Minjares, and I am a program manager with the Aspen Institute Sports and Society program. Welcome to the third and final installment of the Million Coaches Challenge Youth Sports Policy webinar series. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you are returning from the others, welcome back. Uh, the first part of our series explored the current and historic conditions for youth sports policy. If you joined that call, you saw Dion Cooler, Cam, and others talk through some of the sort of state of the field and some of the current challenges we're facing in this space. Part two discussed interesting strategies from neighboring and parallel sectors, particularly after school space, smoking, and we learned strategies for how to enact legislation that we think have relevance for sport policy. In this third part, you'll get insight into some recent policy activity in youth sports, including efforts at both the state and federal level to reduce costs, establish oversight, train coaches, and keep youth athletes safe. In this session, you're going to hear from leaders as they share insights around the policymaking process itself, which has really been the focus. What's the tactics and strategies for how to bring policy to the sector? When does it work, and why? We hope the discussion informs efforts to strengthen coach training, improve access, and help build quality youth sports environments nationwide. We're excited to open this session with a special discussion of the Let Kids Play Act with Congressman Chris DeLuzio, the representative of Pennsylvania's 17th District. Last month, Rep. DeLuzio, in partnership with Senators Booker and Murphy, introduced this bicameral bill to address the problem of escalating costs in youth sports, focusing particularly on the place of private equity. Dr. Julie McCleary from the University of Washington's Center for Leadership in Athletics spoke with Rep. DeLuzio to discuss the components of the bill and what it means for the youth sports sector. We think you'll learn a lot from this conversation, and then we'll be excited to jump into our panel with our three featured guests immediately afterwards. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you on the other side of this interview.
Hi, Representative DeLuzio. Thanks so much for being willing to join us. As you know, we are in the midst of a webinar series about the landscape of youth sports policy in the US. And actually, in the first webinar, we talked about the historical lack of federal policy related to youth sports. And then a few weeks later, you, along with Senators Booker and Murphy, introduced the federal Let Kids Play Act. So we are excited to have you here to tell us a little bit about that legislation and what it aims to do.
Well, Julie, thanks for having me with you. The Let Kids Play Act is a pretty straightforward bill. It goes at what we call vulture practices that we've seen from private equity roll-ups of youth sports that have really priced out kids and families. We're talking about schemes like stay to play, where families are forced to stay in a specific hotel at a specific rate, just as a barrier to entry or a price of entry for kids to play in tournaments. We've seen different schemes around putting moats around facilities, not literal moats, but figurative ones that push out recreational leagues once some of these PE firms and players own ice rinks or fields. Fees they've tacked on to parents, multi-year commitments, banning kids from playing in other recreational leagues, a whole host of practices. Again, we define them all in the bill, and to say that those practices are off limits in youth sports, the ownership model that's engaged in those practices, if they own youth sports leagues or facilities and the rest, they've got to divest and sell back to the community or spin off those assets for the public's benefit. It sets up a fund to support kids being able to play in sports and has opportunity for remedies to get back damages if you've been charged illegal junk fees and gives federal enforcers the power to enforce. So I got pretty high level there, but the core of this really says that youth sports are something that matters to the country and that we're going after some really predatory practices that have driven up the cost of participating in youth sports and has really hurt community and recreational leagues along the way, in addition to the travel leagues that carry such a hefty price tag for families.
Yeah, thank you for that overview. I think a lot of people would agree that youth sports matters a lot, and I'm curious, why does it matter to you? What makes this legislation important to you?
Well, I was lucky enough to grow up getting able to play in, kind of old school little league and boys and girls club basketball and just good community sports. I sometimes talk when I'm talking about what that was like not that long ago. I was born in the mid 80s. You would have the sponsors of the teams be the volunteer fire departments and local businesses, small businesses owned by people in the community. And it was pretty affordable for families. And what I'm seeing, and I know the data, it's very much not affordable for families now. The increase in the cost of youth sports is nearly double the rate of inflation the last 5 years, almost 50% increase. And what I see happening is youth sports becoming a luxury item, and I want to change that. I think it matters that kids have a shot to play. You'll learn a lot on a team, on the field, on the court about hard work. You'll learn about how to get through adversity. Learn about sportsmanship, and you make great friendships. So I think it's a really important part of American life. And this is maybe me being a elected official who cares about the big picture, but I think that this is a pretty important part of the American dream that you should be able to shot no matter your parents' bank account to go play, to join a team, to follow your passion as a kid and learn some pretty important things about yourself and your friends along the way. So I think this is something that Congress should tackle. I think it's important, not just in sports crazy parts of the world like my district. I'm in Western Pennsylvania. We bleed black and gold here, but people all over the country care about sports and they really care about kids having a chance to play.
Thank you. I think a lot of the folks in our audience would agree with you that everybody should have a chance to play. And um, I noted that you said it's something that you feel like Congress should tackle. And so it's interesting to us that you're carving out this federal role for youth sports, which isn't something that's happened before. And I'm wondering if there are other ways you can envision the federal government supporting accessibility, quality, and safety in youth sports.
Yeah, I mean, look, this goes after bad actors and a bad set of practices around the business of youth sports. And by the way, it's a big, billions and billions of dollars business. It's a big business now in a way that it hasn't been. But there's also a piece of this around public investment in the infrastructure of communities and youth sports, those fields, those courts. It's not exclusively the federal government, but I think more broadly, the public should care about kids and people having facilities and parks that everyone can come and play. And I think that's a place where there's probably round agreement, right? That kids ought to have those facilities, those fields, those courts to be able to play. That's about local property taxes and the state investment in parks. And it's about our federal government. When we think about infrastructure and we think about investment, we ought to think about this too. And so, yes, this bill is about going after some pretty nasty and bad practices. But to me, there's a bigger investment and care we should have around youth sports because of how important they are to families and to kids and to communities.
Yeah, and in the rest of the webinar today, we're going to be hearing from folks who are driving policy at the state level and a little bit the local level. How do you
Mhm.
see that? How do you see that balance working out
Well,
between the federal government roles and the state role?
yeah, it's a really good question because, again, on the Let Kids Play Act part, we're going after a pretty nasty set of business practices that really only the Congress can tackle effectively, right? We have the exclusive power in interstate commerce to regulate what happens. And this is a big business now around youth sports. So the Congress has to act here. But as I said, the state and local investment around parks and public lands and public facilities, school district funding to support sports down below the high school level, right? Those are things that local and school district and state officials really have an important job to tackle, in my opinion. And as I said, the federal government has a role here too. I want to see more public investment across the board and so many of the activities and facilities and public parks that underlie youth sports and other youth activities. If you look at our government and take a step back, our government does very little to invest in kids and families. And I think that triggers a bigger discussion that sports, yeah, it's a part of it, but I think, can be doing a lot more to support families and kids in this country. And this is one piece of that puzzle for me.
Yeah, almost two-thirds of the kids in the country play youth sports at some point, so it's an
And
important
I'm a
investment.
parent of kids in youth sports. I will tell you, my oldest is only a rising fourth grader, and we already see the pressures and the costs that throw down on families.
Yeah, you're in the heart of it. You're just getting started.
Yep.
What would just maybe leave us off with what would be your vision for your kids as they grow up in youth sports? What do you want them to experience?
I want them to have fun. I hope there's a love of game, and I'm already seeing it develop. But I want them, just like every other kid in this country, to have a chance. If this is something that they find joy in, that they're learning some of those lessons that I learned as a kid about teamwork and hard work and perseverance, that's really important. And I think one of the most important things you learn playing sports is, yes, the joy of winning, but you also learn how to lose, and you learn how to shake hands and be a good competitor, and then get ready to compete the next time and try to go win. Like there's something about that that really matters. The discipline you learn matters, the hard work. So I hope they find the love of whatever the game might be for them. And I want kids to have a chance to see these things, see the arts, see sports, find their love, find the activities that bring them some interest and joy, that spark that love of learning or that love of athletics, whatever it is. And I just want to see these things never turn into luxury items where mom and dad's checking account might decide whether a kid even gets to play or gets to take a shot at learning an instrument, whatever it is. That's what this is about for me. And I think our country, despite these divided times, cares a lot about kids wanting to have those opportunities. So that's what this is all about for me.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great that you've just brought this issue to the fore and allowed important conversations to happen about where youth sports is headed. And we all look forward to seeing where the legislation goes from here. Thank
You
you so
bet.
much.
Yeah, thanks for shining a light.
Thank you.
Is the executive director of Laureus USA. And he's an experienced coalition builder, fundraiser, facilitator in the field of sports-based youth development. Prior to moving into his current role, Ben was the executive director at Laureus Chicago, where he played an instrumental role in bringing an important piece of legislation to life, which is HB 2418, establishing the Commission on Youth Sports. This is a new state level body designed to improve and support youth sports programs across Illinois. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Vince. Good to see you.
Nothing like a little bit of adversity here early in a Zoom call. I think
this is how we learn. We learn new skills. We keep improving. It's just like sport. Good to be here.
Just like sport, right? And I think this is where we are. So, look, I think there's plenty to talk about here, and I think it's really nice to start with the work that's been happening in Illinois. I think that folks will be very curious to just hear generally more about the story of how this particular piece of legislation came about. It's a unique piece of legislation that is setting up a lot more downstream. So take it away. Like, what is it? How did it come to be?
Yeah, thanks, Vince. So as Vince shared, I'm Ben Schornack. I'm the executive director of Laureus Sport for Good Foundation. We are a global organization that works at a hyper-local level, that were founded under the patronage of President Nelson Mandela and his belief that sport has the power to change the world. I've been with the organization for about 10 years, and my work with Laureus started in 2017, and I can remember a small conference room at a WeWork in Chicago with the initial 12 people who were part of the Sport for Good Chicago Leadership Council. And in that very first meeting, the people starting the coalition were already talking about how we might address policy in sport and saw that as critical to how we would ultimately create a better youth sports system for kids in the city of Chicago and in the state of Illinois. And so, if I'm telling the story of the Illinois Youth Sports Commission, that's the first thing I think of, is that room almost 10 years before the commission actually came to be. As our coalition grew, we began to think about how we might take collective action on the issues that face young people in our state. And the first real opportunity that we had for collective action at a government level was actually around funding. And so when COVID hit and when ARPA funds were flowing through our state, our coalition came together and took a collective approach and created a campaign called Chicago's Comeback, and works to unlock funds for organizations that were using sport as a tool for reintegration for young people as they went back to school and reentered society. And that was our starting point. It was how we built relationships with legislators. And so over the last 4 years, we've unlocked $15 million in funding that has gone directly to organizations that are using sport across the state of Illinois in 77 zip codes. And we could have stopped there and we could have only focused on continuing to pursue funding.
Right.
But we know that money alone will not solve the problems that we face. I'm sure that if that video had played, that would have been the
Yeah.
message there too. Is like
Yeah.
we have no shortage of money in this country. What we have a shortage of is policy, and we're very unique as a country in our lack of policy around youth sports, even in the fact that we don't have a ministry of sport or something similar,
Right.
which most other major developed countries have. And so we didn't stop at funding. We talked with legislators and we said, how do we build on this funding and think about policy that's going to kind of serve as the vehicle for where we talk about funding, but also where we talk about regulation, about coach training, about policy in the longer term. And that's where this idea of the Youth Sports Commission was born. And what we learned is the state had actually already passed an Illinois Youth Sports Commission dating back
Oh,
to 2020, 2021. But that Youth Sports Commission was all focused on tourism. And so I like to say we kind of commandeered the existing commission. We refocused it around young people's access to sport and around equity in sport. And then we got legislators bought back into reestablishing the commission through a new bill with a new area of focus. And it made it an easier argument because we said, look, you've already passed this. This is something you clearly care about. How can we rebuild and make it better together? And Laureus offered our help to, to take, to basically say like, we're an expert. We want to help you do this. We know that it's a capacity lift. You know, we're like here as a third party advisor if you need us, and that's also allowed us and in to have some role in how the commission actually plays out.
nice. Can you just talk a little bit about the structure of the commission? Like, how is it organized? Like, who's on it? What is it actually going to be
Yep.
doing?
Yeah, so I mean, it was passed through legislation, and every commission that is passed in the state of Illinois has to sit within a department. And so this commission
Yeah.
sits within the Department of Human Services, which is also where the funding for youth sports flows through, which
Right.
was a nice thing. The governor's office then is responsible for the appointments. And I see that Jen just put that list of
Yeah.
appointments in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. So it's somebody from the governor's office, and then it's four legislators. And we were able to um, I guess, push some legislators that were already working with us to say, hey, you should raise your hand for this. And because of that, all four of the legislators, two Republicans, two Democrats, are all people who have supported our funding bill over the last 4 years.
Mm.
In addition, the governor's office set up a call with us as they were naming members that they were going to appoint and got our advice on who would be good to be on this commission. And so now, as the final list has come out, 4 out of the 10 commission members are part of the Sport for Good Chicago Coalition, which provides, again, a nice pathway for the coalition to influence the direction
Mhm.
of the commission and where they focus their efforts.
Yeah, you use the word coalition a lot, and I know that's a really critical part of kind of the philosophy, the strategy. Can you talk more about just sort of the local coalition building that I know has like been so critical to this? I just know that there are
Yeah.
people so passionate about this, particularly in Chicago and other coalitions like it around the country. Yeah, just talk through kind of how important that was to this.
Sure. Yeah, so that's Laureus's model, right? Like we are
Yeah.
a grant maker and we have been a grant maker in the US for 25 years, but what we found is because of this lack of infrastructure around the youth sports
Mhm.
system, our money can only go so far. And so our
Yeah.
model has shifted to what I'd call a scaffolding model, which is where we focus
Mhm.
on specific cities and we continue to provide grants in those cities, but then we act as a scaffolding and provide resources to the local community to identify the biggest problems that the youth sports community is facing at large, and then to collectively solve those problems. And so when I
Yeah.
talk about that first meeting, like this was a problem that the coalition came up with right away, and they
Yeah.
identified that need well beyond or well before we did as Laureus. In 25 years, we had never done advocacy work, lobbying work, government work. But because they said that this was important and this was the strategy that they saw, we eventually got behind it and kind of built out our advocacy arm. I think, along with identifying the problem, the coalition is also what gives this movement power. And so the Sport
Mm.
for Good Chicago Coalition, now 10 years old, serves well over 100,000 young people. That's 1 out of every 5 young
Mm.
people in Chicago. It's 1 out of every 20 young people in the state of Illinois.
Mm.
And when we can go into the governor's office and say, we're speaking with the collective voice representing 1 out of every 5 young people in the biggest city in your state, that's a whole different ballgame than if it's just Laureus going in, even with our, founding story of Mandela and the athletes that are behind our work. What legislators
Mm.
care about is like, does this affect my constituents on the ground? and they can't argue that it doesn't with the power that we built through the coalition. And then third and finally, like the coalition is the legacy of this commission. Like they're the ones that are on it, not Laureus, right? And so
Nice.
if we think of the commission as a vehicle to think about long-term policy and funding, there are coalition members who are sitting on that commission and who have been appointed for multiple years who can now actually drive forward what the commission does.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's like a micro macro integration via sort of like bottom up coalition building leading into state level policy. Like it sort of brings it all together.
Exactly.
And I know that, we know that in California, a bill has been passed to explore the formation of a commission. Yeah, what's your sense for like the sort of system wide, other states adopting this kind of a strategy? Do you have kind of a finger on the pulse of where other states and other kind of coalitions are and trying to do something similar? And ultimately, like, why do you believe so much in the sort of commission focused strategy in particular?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, we worked very closely with California as we were both pursuing, they were pursuing their strategy last spring, as were we. They were great partners. And I think we should continue to build pathways and conversations like this where various states can work together and can, I want to be able to say, hey, California is doing this thing. We should try to do it better in Illinois. Like that is leverage to the legislators in our state. California, I know, was doing the same thing. So we should approach this collectively. I think we are all trying to fill a gap in federal policy, right?
Yeah.
And I wish, as we hear that conversation, I'm sure that's what we'll hear. But there is just no federal policy like this, and the path to getting there is a much harder path than what it is at a statewide level. And so our approach at Laureus has been, let's kind of state by state where we work, look at the opportunities for collective action. Let's partner with groups that are doing that in states where we don't do our work. And eventually you might have, 27 states that have statewide commissions, and we can layer that up into learning at a national level. I think the other thing I'd say is like our approach was funding and commission. And I think that it's the right combination of things. There is not enough funding coming from government into the youth sports ecosystem. And there's not enough policy work. And I think that pursuing both, not necessarily at the same time, but within a few years of each other, was the right strategy and allowed us to build one into the other. And my advice for kind of anybody on this call is like, these are relatively, you have to get them prioritized. They are not the first thing that legislators think about, but like these are apolitical asks. Every funding ask that we've made and and the commission that we passed, they all pass with bipartisan support. Most of them pass unanimously. It probably is one of the only unanimous votes in the state of Illinois. And you can make the argument kind of from multiple directions that cut across, even to take politics out, to cut across rural, suburban, urban. Like there is a reason for this type of work across all those constituents.
Amazing. Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate it. We're gonna turn to our next piece here, but we'll bring you back for the panel at the end. But thanks again for all the great work that you've been doing and continue to do.
Thanks, Vince.
All right, folks, we're gonna give our interview with Rep. DeLuzio one more try, and if it doesn't, then we'll move on. But let's give it one more shot. Can't say we didn't try. All right, we're gonna join be joined now by Dawn Anderson Butcher, and Dawn is a really good friend of Aspen Institute and the Million Coaches Challenge. Has been really integral in so many initiatives in the space of coaching and youth sports. I will do a nice formal intro for you, Dawn. At the Ohio State University, Dawn is a professor in the College of Social Work, co-executive director of the OSU Life Sports Initiative. Their team does really interesting work, right? They're doing teaching, research, and community impact work. They've been very active in studying coaching, certainly at a state and national level, policy scans, national coach surveys, as well as implementation of coach training through the really impressive Coach Beyond program. Welcome, Dawn. Thank you for joining us.
I don't know. I can follow Ben. He did such a good job.
Yeah, there's really great work happening, and there's been great work happening that you've been all over, particularly in the state of Ohio. Honestly, give the audience an update on all the things that are happening in Ohio, because there's a lot of pieces, and then we can dive in some of the specifics. But take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Vince. So we've been busy in Ohio doing a bunch of different things. Most importantly for this is our policy innovation, where we passed in the school coach training requirements in mental health for all school-based coaches in Ohio. That was the collective work of partnership agenda with Live Sports at Ohio State, with Ohio High School Athletic Association, school districts across the state. And then also we had a key champion coach in the community, Matt Triplett, who was a state champion lacrosse coach, and sort of put his name and wheels behind this advocacy effort. But in addition to that, we've trained over 45,000 coaches in Ohio in mental health, how to support student athlete mental health, how to, teach leadership and life skills through sport, and all of these other activities that we call Coach Beyond, coaching beyond the X's and O's. A couple other things that have transpired as well are we have a state team. It's not a formal commission like Ben is talking about, but we have a Coach Beyond collaborative that exists of, from state department leads in different units, as well as school district leads, as well as sport organization leads statewide, that meets pretty regularly to talk about what are the needs in Ohio, what are the gaps, what are the resource needs that we use to kind of plan for our efforts. And then the other piece that I like to talk about is most recently is our governor's office, Governor DeWine, and the State Department of Behavioral Health has started to invest resources, particularly in coach training. They see it as a prevention effort, to support positive youth development, to support positive parenting strategies in the community, and to sort of wrap our arms around kids in the out of school time through sports. So those have been some of the really nice kind of gold nuggets that we've had that we're pretty proud of.
Yeah, and when I say that your team is all over, you are all over, both in Ohio and outside. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to maybe go back to the beginning, and sort of talk through, particularly, you started sort of talking about the mental health requirement and the champion. Can you just help the audience understand the story of how the mental health requirement for coaches came to be? What was the sort of journey and all the pieces that made that become law in Ohio?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's really interesting to think back. Right before COVID, we were actually in Central Ohio, a state of play, Central Ohio community with Project Play. And we, did a deep dive in the Columbus, Franklin County, sort of Columbus regional area. And we mapped out, resources and facilities, kids' voice, but we also did a coach survey at that time as part of that localized effort. And it identified some gaps in preparation that our coaches had locally. And then what we were able to do is leverage that local context for our statewide needs assessment that we did through Coach Beyond and the Million Coach Challenge. And so in about 5 years ago, we did a statewide needs assessment where we asked coaches, over 6,000 coaches all across Ohio, what was their background, what was their training, what were the areas that they saw that kids needed support with that they weren't able to address, and then what kind of skills, did they want to build in order to begin thinking about more whole child development as opposed to just sort of winning games and athlete development. And so that statewide data then became great talking points, right? That we could do with our Ohio High School Athletic Association, all of the regional networks for OHSAA, the sport associations that exist in the school-based sport, as well as conversations with our governor's office and, in different entities and also the private non-for-profit foundation space. And so we leveraged those data to then begin talking about what coaches say are some of the needs, what they would like more of in terms of training and capacity building, and then followed that up with different kinds of focus groups with student athletes that, really told about what they were dealing with post-COVID, what some of the mental health escalation was happening and how they were coping with it. And they were telling us things, about how like they were more likely to go to their coach than their school counselor for help and support if they needed it. And we leveraged all that research and talking points in order to make the case, for a broader conversation about what sport can and should be doing in Ohio for kids.
Do you recall like that sounds like a really powerful piece of data in particular? Like what were some of the other like powerful insights that sort of convinced some of the state leaders to say, you know what, it's time, right? It's time for us.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you said that, Vince, because I forgot of one other key piece that we did is we worked with our athletic directors statewide, and they asked us to do an audit of the coach training requirements in Ohio. And so they had us sit down and look at like, how long does it take for a coach to get trained to be a school-based coach? It was a big barrier. The cost was a barrier. So in Ohio, it's over $300 for a first-year coach to be able to get the correct licensure that's needed to be in the school-based coaching role. We also mapped the different courses, like, the first aid, the concussion, the Lindsay's Law, that's our heart cardiac arrest training in Ohio. We mapped our fundamentals of coaching and, some of those requirements, and we found there was 33% redundancy in content across these trainings. And so coaches had this barrier of $300. There was this redundancy in training. Some of the quality of training was not, up to par. And so the other thing that we found were there were timeline barriers. So like first aid was due every 2 years and concussion was every year. And, and it was really an administrative nightmare for many of our sport organization and administrators. And so, one of the things we also went to the legislature to do was to like take away some of that burden and think about some of those timelines and licensure processes and how that can be beneficially improved in order to make it easier for coaches to come into this space. So it was a win for the school-based sport and the ADs because they got this more efficient, less redundant process for bringing in coaches. And then at the same time, as we addressed some of those things, we had data to show the increasing need around mental health and youth development and the call from coaches to have that based on the kinds of things they're seeing out on the fields. And together that came together as a really nice sort of rationale, right, to make some changes.
It's really the art of data storytelling. I think you're kind of bringing together sort of like all these different data perspectives. Coach, you have data on this on the educational system and the curriculum. You have data on the experience of training, the perspectives of coaches. I mean, it's really a composite, right? And so then it's hard to argue like here are all things, and here's the proposed action. I think what's might be a nice kind of next step question, and we'll come back to the national policy scan in a second, but the fact that you have also then enacted the training that fills the requirement and can show now the impact of the training on the identified needs of coaches. Like, can you just talk about how that sort of fills the loop?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of partnering with the university is, there's the content expertise, but then there's the research and data and accountability system. And us at Ohio State, it's a land grant, we're a land grant institution, so we care about translation and making a difference in practice. So what our team has done under the leadership of Dr. Samantha Bates and Dr. Kylie Alt-Baker, we have actually developed out training called Coach Beyond, and it has supporting student athlete mental health, mental performance, how to create a positive team environment, et cetera. But what we did is we ran a randomized trial where we tested, we gave some coaches the training and another school did not get the training. We also measured student athlete experiences from pre to post season last fall.
Right.
And we've been able to demonstrate with, an effectiveness study that if they get 4 hours of this, important work about Coach Beyond, not how to do the tactics and techniques and how to teach the soccer passing, but this other stuff that kids, experiences, their sense of belonging and connection to their team. Coaches are reporting more positive behaviors such as autonomy, supportive coaching behaviors on their teams. And, we've been able to then have that evidence that then we can go back and say, hey, if we enacted this legislation, we're now training this space, and look what it's doing for student athlete experiences in Ohio. We need to continue to do this work and make these investments.
Yeah, and I've seen that data, and I know that we'll share some of the published study, links to the published studies and whatnot, and I know folks should just continue to follow the live sports team for the important insights that keep coming out. One of the things in particular that you've done, certainly as part of the Million Coaches Challenge in particular, was your policy scan, and you're not just interested in Ohio, you're interested in the whole country, and you're also interested in helping other states adopt similar structures. Can you just share with the audience kind of like observations around maybe, what you're seeing in the larger landscape picture of state training requirements for coaches?
Yeah, I mean, Ben made a good point. He said, with the absence of any federal policy, what are we doing at the state level that can then provide this governance accountability structure that requires coaches to have these competencies and also requires organizations to ensure that these coaches are trained and prepared to do this youth work. That's so important. So what we've been doing, this is now the second time we mapped all 50 states in the school-based legislation. So what are the policy in place in the school-based coaching requirements across all 50 states? And been able to take a glance at how many states have what and which ones are limited. And so it's very interesting because most of the legislation is in the health and safety space. 100% have concussion, right, as this most important. So we're going to prevent we're going to make sure coaches know what to do with concussions, but we're not going to let them know what to do with a kid who has signs and symptoms of depression, anxiety. But what it's been able to do too is allow us to see how policy has been changing over the last 3-4 years. And we found, now there are 8 states across the country that have mental health bills passed to require school-based coaches to do training in this area. We also have found limitations, right, to where for example, only 29 of the states actually have background checks required for school coaches in their legislation. That doesn't mean that school districts aren't requiring them, but it doesn't necessarily cover volunteers and, assistant coaches. The other piece that we found in the mapping that I always think is really important is that only 50% of the states really have requirements for middle school coaches. And this whole thing, around, well, okay, if we don't have a policy in place to require training and there's no accountability structure to oversee it, then, how do we ensure that the experience is a quality and a safe one, both from a physical and emotional and mental perspective, is increasingly important. So I think that's what you wanted me to go over. I can tell you more data, but it's very interesting.
I mean, maybe
so the idea is
is there a piece of data that really compels you?
No, I think the thing I would say is the lesson is, okay, we need policy, right, in order to improve quality and ensure safety, both, from a health and safety, but also mental health and wellness and youth development perspective. We have legislation on the books in states around health and safety, and those policies can be easily amended, to include a more broad Coach Beyond sort of legislation. So there's that part that I think is a really great opportunity for folks to think about across the country. But then there is this, okay, you can add a new bill, right? You can add a new piece of legislation like we did in Ohio, but you can also take what's currently on the books and amend it and broaden it and deepen it to do more Coach Beyond related strategies, right? And training requirements. So that's what I think is probably the most important message. We may, we need to see the tweaks as well as the additions.
Yeah. It's great, Don, and I could keep talking with you forever. We're going to bring you back to the panel at the end here. But thank you again for all the great work that you're doing, both in Ohio and across the country. It's really important and impactful. So we appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to bring on our third panelist, and certainly not, last but not least, Jack Crowe. Look, it's been a pleasure getting to know Jack through this process. And for those who don't know, Jack is the founder and chairman of the CoachSafely Foundation. And this is a 501c3 education policy and research organization. They've got a mission focused on youth sports related injury and limiting injuries through research, advocacy, and education, including, very importantly, a vision for a national standard for youth sports safety. I'll share a little bit more here about Jack and some of the work. For those who don't know, Jack's a longtime football coach in the state of Alabama, retired in 2012, later formed CoachSafely. Importantly, in 2016, his efforts in advocacy led to the passing of the CoachSafely Act in Alabama. This is a bill that requires coaches for youth under 14 who practice or play on public property to complete 5 training requirements annually. Think emergency preparedness, concussion head trauma, heat and extreme weather injury, conditioning, sudden cardiac death. It's a bill that also includes a provision to make the CoachSafely course free to Alabama coaches. It's a really good course. And it's 8 modules, takes an hour to complete, certifies you on the spot. The other piece of this is that the CoachSafely Policy Institute is also a companion arm to the foundation. They do the advocacy and lobbying work to make the CoachSafely course legally mandated in every state. Excited for Jack to join us. Thanks, Jack. I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart, all of this work that we've been discussing. My first question, I guess, is really just tell the audience a little bit more about your strategy here, particularly maybe beginning with Alabama, and how'd you get this bill passed?
Well, there were 5 years leading up to passing the bill, and it all started when Dr. Satcher, who's a 16th Surgeon General of the United States, asked me to be a co-chair of the National Council of Youth Sports Safety. And Dr. Satcher was coming out of the concussion, it's 2013. Dr. Satcher was coming out of being the NFL's sort of counsel about the concussion issue that had, gone from being a movie to being in the courtroom. Yeah. And so I joined in there. And then as time went on, you just evolve. I mean, we traveled the country, LA to New York, doing a lot of things. One of them is policy interviews. And that really sort of captured me. So that's 2013. Moving forward, that had about a 3-year life of being involved. And then Safe Kids. I don't know how many people understand it's an organization. It's the largest, it's worldwide. It's the largest child protection agency in the world. And they wanted to investigate training coaches. And so I got on that ship. They just couldn't find a way to do it because I think they were looking at it a little broader maybe than it could actually be handled. And so what I did is I got with experts, sports medicine experts, and I'd been around them. I ran the American Sports Medicine Institute for a couple of years, so I knew where they were and how to get information that was peer reviewed, evidence based. I understood if we could get this all built into a learning management platform that was deliverable, everybody could okay the content and agree that the content was right. The legislator said, what kind of barrier are we putting in front of volunteer coaches, basically? So we got it down to an hour. And actually, it had 2 modules of mental health in it, even though the law doesn't cover mental health. The law itself covers truly what public health collects data on. And they collect data in these other areas. So the interesting thing is we didn't have any resistance past having a course that everybody could agree. This is peer reviewed and evidence based. These words are saying the right thing, and we're not creating an impediment for coaches to do this. And the next thing, really, the other educational part of it, and I truly have had an education. I mean, I'm stepping way beyond who I am. Other than I knew those injuries like the back of my hand, because I'd sit there in a laboratory of injuries to athletes for 40 years. I saw every kind. I'm not going to get into this, but I've stood over 4 caskets. And I mean, been left with a major impact from injuries. Not that they were my players. One of them was at Auburn. We had a kid die of a heat illness, and all of them were preventable. And that's what stuck with me. And
Right.
That's sort of what drove me. So we get this bill passed. One thing that we did really, I think, really smart is we targeted everything with data. Now, we did not make this about school systems. Schools were very involved. The first person to jump on board was Eric Mackey, the superintendent of schools. But his point was, do you know how many kids miss class or have to have accommodations because of sports injuries that they get in youth sports? And he's talking about elementary school.
No, interesting.
But it's 20 million. I mean, that's the number that we've validated. I mean, that was data. Now, 1.5% of that is in Alabama. So we had the support of schools, but we weren't dealing with people that they really had anything to do with coaching of 14 and under athletes, because they literally have nothing to do with coaching 14 and under athletes. And so support, yes, actually directly involved, it's not their game. But we also use this data. 14 and under athletes represent 42 million kids having 60 million registrations. Now, you go to high school, you got 8 million. All right. You go to college, you got 500,000. You go professional athletes, you got maybe 15,000 total. Okay. Right. So where's the biggest population of athletes? Where's the most fragile population of athletes? Where are the most risk taken by coaches who have no knowledge of the risks they're even, putting kids through? So it made sense. All we got was a bunch of head bobbing.
Yeah, like I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, we got a bunch of, okay, but what can we really do about it? But you had to convince everybody that knowledge was the critical piece of this. And we had to come up with efficacy. And we've studied our efficacy. Now, we started off a little slow, but in the 5 years since 6 years since we started doing this, 6 years since we actually got the platform out there, we've trained 75,000 coaches, and we have data on every one of them. We have a software system, and that's the one thing that you have to realize. You got to get the software here. You want data, you want deliverables, you want to know. I mean, we trained 68 coaches yesterday. I've got every one of them's name that I can push a button on my phone and know exactly where they were and where they were trained.
Jack, I might interrupt you just if that's okay, because there were 2 things that I was interested in piggybacking on. One, you really are emphasizing the data, and it also came out in talking with Don and it's what we heard last week and thinking about smoking and public health. Right. One of the things you had mentioned in our prep call was this sort of dual narrative framing of fiscal policy and social policy. And I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that specifically in terms of like how that helped make the case. And I know you probably have really great data behind, but
let's talk real politics here. If this is a blue issue, don't bring it south. Does that make sense to people? It's not going to pass a law. The thing I learned this now. I wasn't smart enough to figure this out. But let me tell you, there were 2 eye-openers as this law got through the vote, and it was unanimous. Now it goes to governors, and now it gets reviewed by everybody that has a lobbyist that would stand in the way. okay? There were little tweaks here and there to the language, but when the Trial Lawyers Association got a hold of it, it became something different. Because what they said is this they helped us more than I could ever imagine at the time. I wasn't talking to these people. Their lobbyists grabbed a hold of this, said, we want this in the law. I looked at it and said, look, and here's what it said. If you take this course, if you're certified who have taken this course, and your behavior is consistent with the knowledge in this course, you have immunity in the state of Alabama. Now, that is a fiscal benefit to every state piece of property that's used in schools in particular. I mean, 14 and under sports is on every school field gymnasium there is, and they have really nothing to do with it other than opening the door and shutting the door. Those coaches are volunteers. They come from mom and pop organizations. They come from these travel sports leagues. They just rent the places. And so that fiscally gave the state, and I tell you, when this thing next sort of showed up, it was in Arkansas. You said I coached mainly in Alabama. I actually coached as much out of the state. I coached at Clemson, and I was a head coach at Arkansas.
Okay.
And this thing went through Arkansas just making phone calls. All right. But then what happened, and I think this liability piece was the kicker.
Right.
I really think the fiscal part of it showed up in Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina. It showed up, but there wasn't anybody that could actually go tell the story like I'm doing right now. I mean, you got to have a storyteller. These senators, and they may be well as intentioned as they can be, but they don't know how to tell the story. They can't bring, here's a phone call. Here's Nick Saban. Let Nick talk to somebody. You get some influencers in there. And so what we found out was, even though it got through Arkansas, because I'd been at Arkansas, it sat still in 5 states. And that's when we decided that we had to create this 501c4. We actually had to put our hands in politics. And I suspect now we became a 501c4 in January. We went straight to Louisiana, and Louisiana passed the law. So we now have 3 states. I suspect we're going to have 5 more states after next session. We're already working it just since January. We've separated at arm's length. You got to have between a 501c3 and a 501c4. 501c3 is charitable. A 501c4 is tax exempt, but it's not charitable. But we also have the ability to walk up and down the halls and ask for votes. Now, I have done that. I have access to a plane. If you need me there, I'll show up. Okay. You can do better than me. What I normally do is call the high-profile University of Texas head coach and say, hey, I need you, buddy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I like it. And, Jack, I'd like to bring the panel back so that we can all kind of engage in some final discussion here.
Yeah.
But I think there's a couple really, I just appreciate your honesty in talking through, the realities for you of passing legislation. And obviously, you've got you're building some momentum, in the South around this. And I think that's really impressive.
Let me add this, Vince, because we have not ignored what the national move has to be. I've already met twice. Nobody probably needs to write this down and repeat this. I've already met twice with Robert Adderhope. He's the chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee. Okay. I said, if we get enough public health departments to do this, will you create a national funding grant? Every state public health. And he said, I don't see why we wouldn't. They have a national goal to get 60% of kids back to playing sports because of what the compound effect of this is on diabetes. And so federal funding is there, but they're not going to manage the process. If you manage the process and you meet their requirements, they will send money to every state public health department.
Mm.
That's what
It's
I was told.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering, maybe Ben and Dawn, if we could just, maybe just react to each other's commentary here. Like, what does it make you think? We have three different sort of models and approaches here at a state level. Similar sort of threads around the importance of data, coalition building, certainly, creating models that have kind of the ability to translate across state lines. But yeah, just kind of open it up to the two of you as you're also listening to Jack. Like, reactions, thoughts.
Jack, that's Dawn again. Thank you so much for all of your work you've been doing over such a long time, and especially using your voice to build our power behind what we need to do. For me, that last part about health and human services, I love the idea of public health and whatnot. I do believe that our data, however, are saying that 60% of kids are dropping out of sport by the age of 12 in the United States, right? And our national coach survey data that we published a couple years ago, we're getting ready to do the next round of that survey in the fall. We found that when we surveyed coaches across the United States, and 77% of the coaches of kids 5 to 10 years old, the number one reason and philosophy driving their coaching is to win games. Right. And so like we have a lot of work to do to, make it so we might want 60% to participate because of health related issues like diabetes. But until we get to the youth development coaches, right? And if they're focused on winning and not on development and fun and belonging and relationships and friendships and, all that good stuff that is this mental health and PYD, Coach Beyond work, it ain't ever going to happen. Right. And so, we have to do both at the same time. That was my sort of call there. And I think it's really important. The rate went down, so coaches of 11 to 14-year-olds was like, 57 or something, right? And so it's those parent volunteer coaches that are, like you said, out on the fields of the schools, unsupervised, don't have background checks, we're giving our kids to. And it's creating multiplicative effects over time for kids' health and well-being.
Right. Listen, I am a coach. The mental part is twice as important as the physical part. And you can ask Nick Saban or anybody that's won a bunch of championships, and I've never been in a school I didn't win one. It's the process. It's not trying to win. You communicate with your kids, and they go out there and they just live in the moment, have fun. The goal being to win. That's not what people that wins goal really is. I mean, the goal is the person. So I just think we have to keep pounding that message out there. I think these two things are blended. The last thing I think we ought to do is make it either or. But I will say this. You got more data on the physical side than you do on the social emotional side. Now, let me tell you what I believe. If we use where we got the strongest data, where we got the biggest pot of money, okay, it's not in DHS, it's in public health. That's where the biggest pot of money is. And then we blend them, because we better have a blend, because one will not work without the other. The social emotional part of it is the only reason I coached, to be honest with you. Right. And every coach will tell you, what do you miss when you're not coaching? The relationship with the kids. And so,
Jack, I'd love to let Ben kind of jump in here before we run out of time. Yeah, Ben, throw in your 2 cents here.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of reflections. The first, which is just a statement that I've used a lot in my work with legislators that I think goes a long way. There is no comparative example of a place where adults are working with young people in such an unregulated environment. So like there's no other place where kids will work with adults where we don't have policy like what we don't have in sport. And so you get legislators to stop, or anybody to stop and think about that for a moment, and think about what every other person that interacts with their young person goes through and how that doesn't happen in sport. I think that's a good starting place. I think the second is, again, because of the lack of a federal approach, we have to take things state by state. And there's so much that has happened in the last 10 years. And I think that the overall assessment that I think Jen put in the chat earlier of what's happening in each state is right. And we have to be learning in real time with each of those approaches and be open to what's not working. For example, like even in coach regulation, one of the first conversations I had with the legislator was, well, who's paying for that? Are we going to lock out the people that we want as coaches if we require them to get certain things right? And so like we each learn something from one another's state policies, and ultimately then that's what's going to bubble up into a more national approach. But we're going to get things wrong along the way. It's like along the way, we've learned so much, like there's things we've gotten wrong. But I think as long as we're all connected and sharing those learnings out, that's I guess how we can bubble this up into a national movement.
And,
those are my 2 thoughts. I know we're almost out of time.
This conversation here is just such a good example of that, Ben, just sort of like really collating the ideas, the strategies, the tactics, what works. I mean, it's just the reality of our system is that we have to work in our context, and we have to make it work with the people who are in positions to make decisions. But I just appreciate all of you joining, sharing. For anyone on, obviously on the call, thanks for being patient with us as we went through this, some tech challenges at the beginning, but I think we had a really fantastic discussion and really appreciate our panelists here. Be sure to just, check your email. We're going to follow with lots of links from the chat. If you get a chance, go to the Million Coaches Challenge website, particularly, millioncoaches.org. You'll be able to find the recording for this session. You'll also be able to find lots of great resources, including our call to action framework. Please take a moment to check out the calls to action. A lot of work went into sort of, articulating the ways in which our system can continue to evolve and grow to reduce barriers to quality coaching in the United States. And check out Dawn, Ben, and Jack and all the great work that they're doing. And stay tuned for more great work happening. The Million Coaches Challenge legacy continues on with lots more organizations investing in the system and trying to improve, youth sports in America. But thanks all of you, and appreciate your time.
So